So hello, everybody. This will be a recorded webinar, so we'll get to share this with a lot of folks, but we're glad to have some folks with us here. I am Pedro Teixeira, MD, PhD, and CEO and co-founder for Prediction Health. And today we have a really great opportunity. I think it'll be a lot of fun. It's a deep dive with Kelly Brown, PT, DPT, OCS. Kelly is a physical therapist and former clinic director over at RET, which is a large physical therapy company over in the Northwest. She's now the Director of Business Development and Clinical Projects here with Prediction Health. And so this is a nice opportunity for us to have everybody get to meet Kelly, learn a little bit more, learn about some of her experiences in PT, and for us to talk a little bit about burnout, and I'm sure a myriad other topics. Kelly and I often get going on great little tangents and have a blast getting to chat. So hopefully you all get to enjoy this as well. I actually got to meet Kelly when I was visiting RET in the early days of Prediction Health, where we were learning more about PT. And having gone to med school, it was a funny kind of like blast from the past to get to shadow again and learn about a brand new specialty after I'd already been out of school for a few years. So it was funny, but very enjoyable. Learned so much, and I think that everybody here will get to learn a lot more from Kelly today. So, without further ado, we can dive right in. Kelly, would you mind telling us a little bit more about your background?
Yes, absolutely. First, thanks so much for having me. This is exciting. As you said, we always have fun conversations. So I'm excited to have this conversation with you and also the rest of the group today. So yeah, a little bit about my background. So I graduated from University of Montana PT school, about a little over 10 years ago. So my first job out of school was a clinical director role. So as you can imagine, that was pretty unsuccessful. So I had zero leadership. My leadership experience at that point was like team captain of my, volleyball team and things like that. So I wasn't experienced in leadership. And then of course I had, next to zero experience as a PT. So it was not a great fit for me. So I actually ended up moving to Washington State, joined RET, and I started out as a clinical, just a staff therapist. That's all I wanted to do. I wanted to be a staff therapist, get to be an expert in my field, and that was it. After a few years, my leadership there, which are fantastic, they kept asking me like, Kelly, do you want to be a clinic director? Do you want to be a clinic director? And I kept saying, no, that sounds terrible. I don't want to do that. So having seen my clinic director and others that I knew go through what they had done. But then after a while, I realized that I really actually wanted to make changes to the clinic, not necessarily in a bad way, but I had ideas and I had thoughts about what could be an effective way to do things. So then I realized like, oh yeah, my supervisors, my CEO that had been asking me this for years, they actually kind of understood that about me. So I then stepped into a clinical director role. And then after a few years of doing that, I stepped into a regional director role, which was fantastic. I went through leadership training. I did the evidence in motion EPPM, which stands for Executive Practice Program and Practice Management. So that was fantastic as well. A lot of leadership education. And then I started doing documentation training for all the people within RET. So I did the training, I did all the efficiency, kind of building templates. I did all of that, which Pedro, of course, that's how you and I met. And so there was just a lot of kind of development and movement through the leadership. And then we'll talk about this more, but then of course, then I've transitioned over into the tech world to working with you fine folks at Prediction Health.
Well, we're of course very excited to have you on board. So before we dive into that side, it would be really great to hear a little bit about, physical therapist. You got to be a clinic director. Obviously a big, responsibility, a lot of opportunities to do leadership at scale in a very intense environment. What were some of the joys, right? And the pros, the things you really loved about those roles?
Right. Yeah. I always found being a clinic director I found the same joys in the clinic director as I did as a therapist. And that's actually what I started realizing and why I wanted to move into leadership is that as a PT, and I don't think this is unique to PTs in the healthcare world. I just think that PTs have more of an opportunity to develop relationships with their patients because we spend so much time with them. We spend however many hours a week, 2-3 hours a week with our patients for, however many weeks. So we genuinely are become friends with our patients. And what I loved about that was that we could help them with all the things that are health related. Like we weren't just addressing the problems that they came in with, but we were addressing diet, we were addressing sleep, we were addressing smoking cessation, weight loss. RET and the company that I had worked with, we had a very forward-thinking kind of direction with our company where we had nutrition on staff. I became a pelvic floor therapist, so I was able to help with sexual health with patients as well. So I just really, really liked that kind of total helping of the patient, right? So not just one specific thing, but all of the different things that are involved in health. And then what I realized as a clinic director, you get to do that with your staff too. So, and obviously in more of a professional way, but also in a personal way too. Obviously, you get to know your staff on a personal level and you get to help them kind of move through their professional goals, but you get to help them be better practitioners. You get to help form where they want to go from a clinical aspect, from a professional aspect. I learned from one of my dear mentors that it like for your specific staff, like I was told them, like, if you're not happy here, I want to help find where you should be happy. Like, because that's how you can help grow your staff and really have loyalty from your staff, is because you're growing them as a human being. And so when I realized that, like as a clinic director, I thought, oh my gosh, like this is really great. Like not only do I get to do that with patients, but I also get to do that with my staff. And then stepping into a regional director role, I also got to do that with clinic directors, which I really liked that, because as a clinic director, you have your own unique set of challenges that you come against. And so it's a challenging position. And so as a regional director, I was able to help kind of guide clinic directors into, how you can be more effective at your job, not have troubles with burnout, like all the things that we're going to talk about today. So I actually found like the joys that I had as a patient, like inpatient care and working as a PT, I had very similar joys as a clinic director and also as a regional director, just on a different scale with different people that you're helping, but in the same way.
Yeah. I often think a lot about the different roles that I've gotten to take and now the company. And I think a lot about the problem solving aspects of it, but it's really nice to think about how you get to help patients make progress with their health and with their well-being, and then to sort of think about that from a leadership role, and that there also is, you're helping someone, improve and grow, hopefully, if you're a great leader, which I know that you were and are here now at Prediction Health. And so it's really great to get that kind of satisfaction helping people through different parts. So that's wonderful. On the flip side to the joys and the pros, there's obviously always, challenges and more difficult things. And so what were some of the biggest challenges that you face, and what did you learn about them and with dealing with them and helping other people deal with their own challenges and obstacles?
Yeah, I think my challenges weren't unique to me. I think that they're very common across the board, both as a practitioner, as a clinic director, and then, just a little bit different as a regional director, but it's just all the things, how do you manage everything? How do you manage the patient care with, analyzing all your metrics and doing your marketing and talking to physicians and making sure you're meeting with all of your staff? Just all of it was really challenging. How to juggle it all, how to make sure that you can, do all those things and take care of yourself. And then if you want to have a personal life, throw it in there as well. How do you kind of manage all of those things together? And then also like do it with a smile on your face, right? Like I had a friend in college and he used to use the phrase, I'm a happy warrior, is what he used to call himself. And I just laughed at that all the time, because I thought, what a beautiful kind of phrase. Like I know I'm in the dredges of this, and this is, there's a lot of challenges to it, but can I be happy and graceful in this challenging position? That was always something I, tried to kind of have that like thought in my head, like, Kelly, be a happy warrior. Like you can be happy doing these types of things. So I think that, that is challenging. I think specifically for clinic director, the thing that was always challenging for me was turnover, losing staff, trying to hire staff. That was always something that was really challenging for me. I had a hard time not taking things personally. And so, which I worked on over the years. And, again, not everyone is going to stay in one position, right? That is not what a lot of the roles in our company really aren't designed for. That an exercise tech is really, a transitional role to something else, right? We want to see them do that, but it's always really hard to retrain your staff and put the energy into it again. So really, adjusting to that. And then the huge obvious one that was always a challenge was documentation. I mean, that's literally the reason that you and I know each other, Pedro, is because I was so passionate about making that less of an impact on people. And that is like, if you want to just see me get riled up, which I'll try to avoid today, but if you want to see me, talking about documentation and how how much of a burden it can be, all of the things that you can do to make it better. That's really, I started realizing that was a huge passion of mine, in that if I could change that for both myself and also my staff members, then I could make a huge difference in just the quality of their work and how they feel, which, how we feel is always going to be reflected into our work with our patients. And so, and I would always see that with my staff, and, bringing that up to people like, hey, I can tell you're having a tough day today. Let's keep that here, which I am a place you can come and talk to me about all of that, but our patients cannot sense that. They need to have a place where they can be the center of, their world, which is, what they're feeling that day, the challenges they're having with their own, problems versus feeling some of ours. But the documentation, I always say, like, it feels like it's just this weight, like, coming down on you. And the more, notes you have to do, the more phone calls you have to make, the more authorizations you have to do, like, it just starts to weigh on you, and you can just feel it throughout the day. And it's something that I know is definitely not unique to me. And I certainly saw not just me, but all the people I worked with struggling with that too.
Yeah. Challenges people have to deal with, and like the drudgery of work, there's always going to be something, right? It's not going to be probably like fun, but getting the opportunity throughout the different builds and services and things that we've done, the compliance challenges now that people are having to do, and getting a chance to make computers like help and make, lighten the load. I know basically everybody on the team really gets a lot of joy out of hearing that we're making people's lives better and easier. And so it's a great reminder to like just hear from people, like, it's this huge weight, and to kind of like lift that off their shoulders to whatever degree we can, especially when we get to use, robots, computers, AI is really, really exciting.
Well, I just to kind of add to that, I remember there's a great book by Larry Benz on empathy, and he talks about how everything that we do throughout the day kind of drags on our empathy, right? Like every conversation, every email, every single thing that we do. And so, like, I feel like technology is a way that we can slowly remove some of those things that tend to pull away from us. And so, and like even a small change can make such a huge impact on our day-to-day life. And that's really what, as you and I started working together, I was really seeing about Prediction Health, which is why one of the reasons I made the jump over here, but yeah, we'll get to that later. But that was something that's very important to think about from, small changes can have a very large impact on our life. We just have to understand that it's the diligence and the discipline to make those changes.
And then we got burnout, we got turnover. Are there additional lessons? Are there things that, to kind of cope, to catch things early, other things that you want to share in sort of managing and doing the best to deal with a system that can be very difficult and sort of cause this result of burnout for many folks?
Yeah. So I'll first kind of outline, like, there's a couple things about burnout. So I've thought a lot about this in the last few years, probably, because obviously there's a lot of conversation about that in the healthcare world, just, in general. I think COVID really put a lot of that stuff, in light. I was practicing and, running a clinic and doing all the things during COVID. So, that was a particularly interesting time to be practicing and talk about like additional stressors, right? Like, keeping your patients safe, the different rules that are happening and changing, every week to week. So that was a very challenging time to practice in general, not to mention how to keep, the doors open and your business running. So that itself was very challenging. But first, like, I realized, like, I actually was feeling burnout, and I'm like always one of those people like, oh, burnout must be so terrible. Like, I wonder what that feels like. And they're like, oh, I'm experiencing it, Kelly. Like, this is what that is. And there was kind of a moment where I realized, like, I got a text message one morning, which, like, again, like my first patient is at 7:30. Like, I lived in the Seattle area, so traffic is horrendous. So I'm leaving my house by like 6:15. So I'm up in, 5 a.m. or whatever. And I get a text message at like 5:15, which is like never good. Like, and like, if any of you on this call have been a clinic director, like, you just dread those early morning text messages, because you're like, oh, somebody is going to be sick and I'm going to have to figure out what to do. I have to get in early. I've got to call patients. I've got to cancel. I've got to move people over. That means I'm seeing, double the patients I thought I was seeing today. And like, I was just getting myself super worked up, and I hadn't even looked at the text message yet. And I was just getting really upset by it. And I looked at the text message, and it was a happy birthday message from my mom, because it was my birthday. And I'm like, I didn't even remember. And I was so worried. And I just knew that this was going to be one of those types, one of those text messages. And so that was kind of one of those moments where I realized, like, I I wasn't necessarily like, my headspace wasn't great. And like, as opposed to seeing a text message that comes in the morning, if somebody's sick as a, this is what happens and people can get sick, it would just be this huge, burden. And so I started realizing like, there's just a lot of like things, a lot of weight happening, and I really did feel like I had tried to do a lot of the things to help fix it and stuff. And so I really started going into like, what makes it better, what doesn't make it better, like burnout and stuff. And then one of the things I've always felt as a leader, and whether this is right or wrong, I'm not sure. I probably am still working this out myself, but that I can't show that I'm feeling burnout to my staff because I want them to not feel that. I don't want them to feel the burden that I'm feeling. And so whether that's good or bad, I'm not sure. I still don't know the answer to that, even though I'm not necessarily in those positions anymore. I'll probably never know the answer perfectly, but I do think that I really tried not to do that for good or for bad. And so my staff, when I saw them where I felt like they were, burning out or whatever, which is typically like their documentation was behind, or they were a little bit snarky to me, like they weren't necessarily their typical selves. Like I would usually ask like, hey, what's going on? And then trying to kind of solve the problems, right? What's interesting about PT is you have very different roles. So like clinic directors have very specific reasons that they burn out. So when I was regional director, I was really trying to help them organize their time and understand how to manage, caseload and also their staff and also their role as a clinic director. As a clinic director for my staff of clinicians, I was helping them manage their time management with documentation, specific problems they might have with clinical skills, organizing those types of things. And then with your ancillary staff, so your front desk staff and your techs, it was how to manage the workload that they have, which is a lot oftentimes. Like the amount of work our front desk staff have is incredible. It's an incredible amount. And typically we just add to it and we don't take away from it. And so that was always something like I felt was my role, was to help simplify jobs and to help make sure it was the most efficient and not repetitive and stuff. So I was always a very loud person in my company, again, for better or for worse, I'm not sure. But if there was something that I saw at the front desk that was inefficient or it was causing too much work for my front desk person, I was talking to their boss. I was talking to the person in our organization who, put that into place because I was their champion. And so I always felt like it was part of my role was to help reduce the burnout in my staff too, and to help them through that. So that was like, so yes, I experienced it myself. I definitely had my staff experience it. And so, but I really did feel like part of my role was to help them through that and understand how it could be better for them. But again, you have to have time in your day to meet with your staff, to talk to them about that. So even just saying that, like, and I always had a goal, like I was going to have a one-on-one with every, every person in my clinic every month. That's not nearly enough to understand what's going on with them. So you really have to keep a pulse on what's happening. I was very lucky that I oftentimes worked with people who helped me do that. So I had staff members who knew my kind of clinic culture and they helped me create that. And also if something was amiss, they would bring that to my attention. I was very, very lucky and blessed to work with people who helped me with that. So I didn't have to do that on my own, but that also wasn't always the case.
Yeah, it's really great to think about. There's so many different levers or strategies, and so much of it is systems, right? Like if you have a system that's just like poorly designed, it can be difficult for the front desk person to be able to feel like they can point out that the system's inefficient or to sort of like do that. So thinking about the systems around people is really great. Also, of course, then the completely opposite end is like the aggravating, alleviating factors, the things that you can do more mechanistically, perhaps on the individual level. And so, I know you've mentioned a bunch of those sorts of things to us in the past. Do you want to sort of review some of the key, aggravating, alleviating factors for burnout?
Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, just in your question, you've touched on a couple of different things. So first, when I started kind of diving into this, and when I became a clinic director, like I really dove into the leadership aspect of things. I wanted to be understanding that, me being a good leader is going to make my clinic successful, and it's going to make me a better clinician because I'm going to understand how to lead people, right? Which of course is what PTs do every day. But what I realized is that in the leadership training, I learned a lot about myself, which is part of becoming a good leader, is understanding yourself very well. And so I started doing some professional coaching. So Rob Weiner, he's a wonderful friend of mine now, but I went through a whole year's worth of professional coaching with him, and he just really helped guide me through this. And so much to my husband's dismay, anytime we have big decisions, we always sit down and do like questions where I fill out questions, he fills out questions, and we come together. So I learned that from Rob. So my husband just loves that, I tell you what. But just so I started doing that. I actually started doing a lot of social emotional intelligence. There's a book out there. I have Travis Bradberry. He wrote a book called Social Emotional Intelligence, and you take a quiz and it tells you like how you are on the EQ scale. And then it gives you tips on how to improve. So, I went through all of that. I started really thinking about like, there's tons of blogs and stuff out there about like how to reduce burnout, right? And it was always like meditate, exercise, take a Con Ed course, like all these things, gratitude journal, create more empathy in your life, right? So like I went down the rabbit hole with those, and just really, time management, there's just all sorts of different things that you're supposed to be able to do to help reduce burnout, which were all great tools, right? That's all great tools, but I didn't feel less burned out after that. And so that was always kind of an interesting thing. And so my husband actually introduced me to this podcast, and his name is Dr. Zubin Damania, and he goes by Dr. Z-Dog, if you're familiar with him, Pedro. So he's kind of a wild guy, but he has a podcast where he says, don't stop calling it burnout. And his philosophy about burnout is that when we use the term burnout, it's essentially telling the people who are experiencing it that it's your fault. You're not meditating. You're not expressing gratitude. You don't have enough empathy, and you need to do all these things in order to not experience burnout. Instead of what he calls it, which is moral injury. And so I have watched this podcast multiple times because it was such an eye-opening thing for me, where he basically says, as practitioners, and this, of course, he's a physician. I, of course, apply this to PTs because it's the same across the board. He says, we come into our practice anticipating it to be a certain way. When we get there, we realize it's not. It's documentation, it's billing, it's dealing with insurances. It's all these different things that we did not prepare for. And we didn't come into the profession with the understanding of that. So for me, I have seen that as an issue in two ways. I think that our educational system is not preparing clinicians correctly for the system that they're entering into. So I think that's number one. We come out of school with this, like, I'm going to be the greatest clinician in the planet, and I'm going to treat so many people, right? Which is fantastic. And we need those people, but we have no understanding of how to run a business, how to bill, what it looks like when it comes to like all the different things that happen in the insurance world, and also what you have to do to fight for those things. And so we are completely blindsided. And so then we experience what Dr. Z-Dog calls moral injury, which is we are actually having a moral issue with what our job actually is. So that really resonated with me. And then I realized, so back to the two things that are wrong. So it's the educational, and then it's just the institution that we're in, the healthcare institution. So like you're saying, we have this structure around us that no matter what we do for ourselves, we can't change that. So there, of course, is things that we have to change within ourselves, right? And I am a firm believer that if I can change myself, I can change my family, I can change my community, I can change my state, I'm a firm believer in that. But I also feel like in order to do that, you have to understand the institutions that you're in. So for me, I took that next step of joining my PT PAC board. So I was raising money to, lobby people in our state to make sure our practice act was what we wanted. So I started doing that. I started doing the documentation stuff. That's when I really got into like how to be more efficient in documentation. Like, how can we do all these things? And then I realized that it wasn't quite enough because I didn't feel like I was making changes as big as I wanted to. And I also started realizing I had a different skill set outside of what I had initially thought was my skill set. So it's been a very long, interesting process for me kind of to move through this whole thing of like burnout. But I think that podcast about it being a moral injury really made me realize that. And Pedro, I think we do have to say this analogy of the Star Wars analogy of the room that's closing in, right? And so like the room is closing in on you, and that's the institutions. And you can stick a pole to try to stop those from closing in on you. Yeah. And that's all the things that we try to do on a daily basis to, decrease our burnout. But unless you can get out of that room and you can change the ship around you, like you can't actually fully change that. So that's what I started realizing. But I also really felt empowered after doing all of that other work that I could actually do that. And I think there is a problem where people don't feel like that they can actually make changes to larger things, right? They can't make changes to our educational institutions. They can't make changes to our healthcare structure, right? Like that's a huge daunting task. But I did feel like after kind of going through some of the smaller, like the coaching and, my social emotional intelligence. And I did one of the most influential books for me has been Jordan Peterson's 12 Rules of Life. If you've ever read that, Pedro, but it's amazing. And then there's a gentleman, his name is Jocko Willink, and he is if you know who he is, and his whole philosophy, he's super cool. And his whole philosophy is discipline is freedom. And that has always stuck with me. And especially from a PT standpoint, like the discipline to do your documentation is the freedom from having to do it on the weekend, right? The discipline to eat healthy is the freedom from the health problems with obesity. The discipline to do exercises and to strengthen your body is the freedom from, injury and things like that. So that really has resonated with me too. So I think that the discipline to set goals and to try to reach them in whatever aspect you need to creates a freedom to be able to make the changes to the institutions that we're talking about. So, but it's been a very long journey and not a direct one. And so that's why I get really passionate and I enjoy talking about this, because there's a lot of information out there. There's a lot of really good information, but I think it's a very personal journey on each individual level of, what we each individually need to work on in order to be a better, PT, a better leader, a better just human in society, and then how we can start to make changes to certain things.
You remind me of a couple things, but just two of them. First is that the real world is very messy, right, and complicated, and you're dealing with a whole population of patients, a team of people with their own strengths and weaknesses and challenges, and then this challenging system around you for, who pays for what, and the reimbursement and insurance, and you're at the mishmash of all this, and it's really complicated. And that usually means that the questions can't be overly simple either, right? So it's like, do I meditate and that'll solve all my problems? It's probably like not a yes or no answer, right? It's not like, do we work on efficiency or do we work on quality? Like, well, both, right? And so formulating the problem as like a yes or no, right? Is it the system work or is it us individually working on things? Well, it's probably both in like a really complicated way. And then when people want to do something, were they being good or were they being bad? Well, everybody is going to do their best. I think most people are trying to do their best. And then how easy you make it to do a certain task usually increases the probability, increases the number of people that are going to succeed, right? If it's super hard, a small number of people are going to stay on top of their documentation and have nice compliant notes. But as you make it easier and easier, you can get more and more people to do it. And it's not a question of good or bad or yes or no. It's like, how easy, was it? And if I make it easier for them by picking better tools, having really good software for them, having a good environment, thinking about their motivation and if they feel appreciated, and everything you can do to kind of tilt things in people's favor is a way to get improvement. And I like to kind of think of the world as this like shifting, messy gradient, mush that you kind of just like try to push it a little bit more in a direction, but never expect like everything's going to work out or everyone's being bad at doing their documentation, right? There's a, confluence of lots of different factors contributing to whether or not, things are successful or not.
Well, I'll kind of add to that, like just what that makes me think of is that there's the phrase, like the only thing that you can control is your reaction to something. And so like in this messy, this messy thing that we have that's, crazy and complicated, the one thing that we can control, which I might add relatively unsuccessfully most of the time, right? Like we're human beings. So we're only like somewhat successful at this, but controlling our own reaction to something is the only actual thing we can have control over. We can't even have control over our emotions. And I think that that's what's really interesting is that our emotions happen and oftentimes happen without our like acknowledgement, right? Like it even recognizing what they are can be challenging, but we can control how we then react. And so obviously that takes an incredible amount of practice and is very challenging. And like I said, I think we're not all the time successful with that, but I think that that's when you can start doing that, that can actually really change the way you view things, and that you view like, oh, okay, well, if I can have control over myself with this, then maybe I can start, being more involved in different things and stuff, because I'm not myself overwhelmed, which is really nice.
Exactly. So, as promised, Kelly and I have gotten a little metaphysical, a little philosophical about things. And we'll maybe take this opportunity to switch gears a little bit here, because there's two other things I thought would be really exciting to touch in on. And that is, you've had this more traditional physical therapy role, and now you've gotten involved in like the tech world with, this crazy startup that's using AI and some great folks on our team. And I think it'd be really interesting for folks to hear a little bit more about that, since that is a very rare thing. And I know I've gotten asked that many times in the past, like, you jumped into tech, Pedro, like, right. How is it,
Right. Yeah, well, I think, I've kind of alluded to a lot of this, but just my, like I said, my development through being a clinician and being a clinic director, and then being a regional director, and like how I wanted to help the profession, right? When I was the staff therapist, I was very passionate about being the best staff therapist and treating as many patients as I could and helping them all the best to my ability. And then as a clinic director, I really wanted to help my staff, and I really wanted to help, all of them. And then as a regional director, I really wanted to help the clinic directors I was working with and their staff. And then I kind of realized, like, I can take my skill set and move into a different realm where I can help PT profession. And so I was so blessed to have met you and understand, what Prediction Health can do, and how the technology works, and what the possibilities are within physical therapy. I just realized, like, there is so much opportunity to actually help the profession of physical therapy. So that was my big driver. There was also a lot of personal factors that came into that as well. My husband and I were moving out of the Seattle area for multiple personal reasons. And so I was basically going to start a clinic, or I was going to, leave the PT world. And so I have 2 young girls, and again, same kind of issues we were just talking about with, hours and all the different things. I realized I needed a little bit different lifestyle. And so, but I needed a lifestyle where I still felt like I could make a huge impact on physical therapy, because I think that, and I can't remember, I saw a speaker say this once, but that PT is the solution to healthcare. Like the healthcare problems, like we know that PTs can lower the cost of healthcare. Like that is not new. Like we know all of these things. Like we know that PTs have the ability to differentially diagnose. Like all of these things are possible. In the military, the primary care providers are PTs. So they go to PTs first, and then the PTs say, okay, you need to go see this physician. You need to go see this orthopedist, or you need to go see, this GI doc, or whatever it is. And so I definitely subscribe to the, primary physical therapy kind of model where people should come to PTs first. I think there's a lot of issues in why that's not happening, but I have always felt that way. And I'm also like, how can we make our system actually believe that and support that with reimbursement, and support that with how they, all the different things that need to happen from a high level in order for that to happen at the lower level. So I actually feel like my ability to jump into the tech world is my way of doing that. And so that's one of the reasons. Now, I will tell you, I was not certain that I had the skill set to jump into the tech world. And that was a very interesting, I just had to believe that, Pedro, if you believed I could, then if the team says, okay, Kelly, we want to bring you on, then yes. And then I could grow into that. And so that's been a very fun challenge. I equate it to when you're in high school and you're a freshman in high school, and then you become a senior and you're like, man, I am a top dog. And then you go to college and you're a freshman in college, and then you're a senior in college and you're like, oh man, I'm a top dog. And then you go to PT school and you're a first year PT student or med school. And then you get done with PT school and you're like, oh my gosh, this is so awesome. And then you start your first job and you are in your actual clinics, right? And then you become a master clinician, and then you become a clinic director and you don't know what you're doing. And then you become actually a pretty good clinic director. And then you become a regional director and you don't know what you're doing. And then you become a pretty good regional director. So I just started that whole process over again, but just in a different industry. And so I do think that just challenging yourself in general is really important. I myself thrive on that. But I also, there's another thing I really wanted to bring up, is that I started viewing, so there's the concept of work-life balance. And I think that phrase does us a disservice, because it basically insinuates that work and life are like this, and they do not coincide with one another. and that they are separate from one another, and that we have work life and we have our life, and we need to like balance those. And I don't think that that's true. I think that our work is an integral part of our life, our family life, all the things. I myself met my husband at my work. So I've always found like my work, some of my best friends are people I've worked with. Like you become family with the people you work with. There's so much literature on, people who do really well in their job enjoy the people they work with, they enjoy their work, right? So I think the term work-life balance does not do it justice. So actually there is a model called the Kaleidoscope ABC model. And it's basically a it's a kaleidoscope of where you are in your life and what is important. So the ABC stands for authenticity, balance, and challenge. So like when I was single, before I was married, before I had kids, like I could work 60 hours a week. I could, see how many patients. Like I picked up extra hours at another clinic because they had somebody like maternity leave fall through. I was taking my OCS. Like I had time to do that and I could prioritize it. Now I would never do that because I have 2 young kids under the age of 4. So it's one of those things that my balance and my work-life balance is different. And so they call it the kaleidoscope effect because it doesn't mean I care less about work. It's just that priorities are a little bit different and they shift. And that's how things should be because our life does that. And so if we don't think about our work-life balance in that sense, then we can't actually like find what works for us best in that season of our life. And so that's, again, one of the reasons I started thinking about, maybe I need to leave the traditional PT space in general, because I need to do this kind of shift, this kaleidoscope shift into where instead of thinking more about like, grinding down, all the different things I care about in the PT world from patient care, I'm now working hard in a different way, but in more of a, whole like PT profession way.
I like that. The shifting, the transition, right? That's just part of life. And I'm seeing this like repeating progression, right? When you're like really little, it's kind of like really centered on you because you need to like learn how to walk and talk and learn math. And then you need to sort of like take the next step out and you need to understand how like you fit in with your family and your like immediate people. And then how do you fit into like a classroom or a society? And then, and you go through all these stages where you're, top of the heap, right? Top of the senior, right? And then you go back to the bottom. And I know you and I have experienced that many, many, many times professionally because there are all these transitions that happen. And then within each of those, it's can I become competent in this? Can I help my colleagues become competent? If I'm going then to a leadership role, can I help the people, that are on my team, improve and understand how to manage, that? And you get to just do it again and again. And for folks that ever ask me, like, should I do tech, or they're thinking about tech, that it's a very fast moving field. And so everyone has experience taking these transitional leaps. And I would basically say like the most important one, and one of the things we saw that we knew that you had was the ability to like take on these transitions, to like learn new things and adapt. And if you have that, you can, and you want to go into tech, then that's one of the like key things. And it also then makes all the other transitions you have to do as part of life, easier to like just embrace it and be like, I'm gonna go back to the bottom of the totem pole and I'm gonna work my way up, and that you're gonna embrace that and enjoy learning and growing and basically going through the stages of life as things do just change, because you have to, time passes. So.
I heard during all the very beginnings of the pandemic stuff, I can't remember who I was listening to, but they mentioned that human beings have the most incredible ability to change and adapt from like an evolutionary standpoint. We can adapt to any environment. We can make changes to, all the different things that happen to us in a lifetime, right? And I find that that's so interesting because we are also, when we consciously think about things, we are so resistant to change. And so I find that those two things coexist, even though they're complete opposite, they coexist within humans all the time. And so, which I think is a very common theme. Someday, Pedro, we can do a Q&A on parenting, because I have a whole theory on parenting about that. But basically, we have the ability we are the most adaptable beings on the planet, yet we resist it. Like our brains do not want it. If you talk to somebody about change and trying to implement like a new technology in your company, a new EMR, like people are so resistant to change. So for me, I actually like during that whole pandemic thing and like really seeing how adaptable our entire society was, and like very adaptable. And I just found that to be very interesting because it reminded me that, and I would remind myself when my brain wanted to say no to change, I remind myself like, I am the most adaptable being on this planet. I can do this.
Yeah.
And so like, that's the type of being that I am. I am supposed to and designed to do this. So that was always like that kind of, maybe I'm a little bit more wired to be comfortable with change. Since I have made this jump, I have a lot of my previous colleagues that are just like baffled, like, Kelly, I can't believe that. That's totally crazy. Or just, my husband and I moving to a new place and like all the things, like it's just a lot of different things. So I think there are certain thresholds that people can tolerate with that. But I think the more you push yourself into that discomfort, the easier that is, which of course, I think that if you feel discomfort in something, then that typically means that needs to be where you need to spend your time. That was always my strategy when I was teaching patients yoga and they'd go, oh, I don't do yoga. I don't do yoga. And I said, but you probably should. That's why you should do yoga, is because you don't do yoga. So that's been a philosophy of mine as a practitioner and also just in life, but yes.
Yeah. I will have to track this down, but there's actually named cluster of neurons in the human brain that are responsible for enabling you to turn off the instinctual recoil response to push through things that are unpleasant. So like if a dog puts its foot on something that's sharp, and any entity, right, your first reaction is to like pull your foot back, right? But humans actually have by far the most neurons dedicated to counteracting that initial neuron response so you can push through it. And it's got a really cool name named after some like scientist guy. Sadly, I can't remember it offhand, but it's like 10 to 20 times more neurons than like the next most numerous neurons in a species. It's just like, that's funny because I just found that out like last week. And so you bring this up. And so I'm gonna have to memorize that name so I can drop it at parties and impress people with my random neuron fact. If you expected not nerdy conversation, then surprise.
It's very true. I know.
To finish off here, I think we got one more really fun thing, and I am a huge fan of Back to the Future, and so I'd like to end this webinar before we launch a couple of questions to see what do you think about the future? You're now involved in tech. You see some of the crazy things we're developing. You've seen obviously so much in PT. What's your bet? What are the most exciting things that you see coming down the pipeline, either that you think are going to happen or that you wish would happen?
Yeah, great question. First, I will say that my journey into tech has actually reignited my optimism about the future of PT. So that has been because I feel like I'm more involved in the things that are the future versus just reacting to the things that are happening to me as a clinic director and, as a practitioner. And that's one of the things that I enjoy about my job so much, is that I see where the future of PT is, and it's awesome. So I do think that there are a lot of really amazing things that are coming in PT. I do think, personally, I think that there will be a shift to, I just think the healthcare world has to shift to where PTs are seeing more patients from a primary care. I mean, obviously the current model we have is unsustainable from a, financial perspective. So we do need to really, really figure out ways to do that. However, the one thing that the PT world has not done well is prove that from a data analysis perspective. And so that's really where I feel like with our Prediction Health team, we've been able to collect data, show proof, and then working with the other teams that we're working with, right? I think that in the tech world, everybody is, all the companies we've talked with, they've been so mostly, benevolent and very excited and wanting to work together and to really kind of reach the same goals with our data. So I think that is happening. I think with the AI technology that we've been working with, to me, I can see that being basically like a solution to the problems of PT. Like when we talk about documentation, when we talk about authorization, when we talk about compliance, when we're talking about like operations, like all of the analysis that we can do with AI versus human analyzing all those things, we can scale those things and we can have them be accurate. And so we actually can take that burden off of all of the people in the clinic to actually see patients. I have one of our clients, he always teases me and he says, Kelly, if a robot takes over my job as a PT, like I don't even care as long as the robot does a good job. And I laugh about that because that will never happen because humans need other human contact. And But what AI and what robots can help us with is the part that doesn't need human contact. So, the recommendation of special tests, the diagnosis, whatever might be of like a clinical use, that can happen. And then we can work on relationships because that's what humans are really good at. And so we can work on relationships. I mean, if you look at the data, there's a really interesting research out there about outcomes for physical therapy patients. And the number one, reason for like a positive outcome is their relationship with their therapist. Like it has nothing to do with the skill set of the therapist or of, what was actually performed, but it's the relationship they have with their therapist. So we know that is such a huge component. So robots are never going to take away a PT's job or a healthcare professional's job because we do have to have that human relationship. However, I do think that AI can supplement all the things that we don't have to do. And that is from scheduling to call reminders to like all the things that our front desk does, to all the things that the clinicians have to do from a paperwork standpoint, to even making decisions on like, where should I go next with an exercise? I mean, I know that was always a challenge for me as I would get stuck in a rut with exercises. And I'd be like, why haven't I done this really great exercise in a while? But if I have a system that says, hey, this is your diagnosis, this is what we've been seeing, why don't you try these 5 exercises? And I can go, oh my gosh, I forgot about that one. Like, that's a great one. So I think there's so many applications for this. I think one of the exciting things that I love about my job with Prediction Health is I get to come up with ideas about it. And like, what would be so cool? What could we do? How about Pedro? What about this? Like, how about this? And that has been, and getting feedback from our clients that, we'd really like to see this. This is how this technology can help us. So I think that there's so many positive directions. And I think it's really hard to see that right now, just in the state of, our healthcare world, our country right now. It's really challenging to see that. But again, we will get beyond this day. We will get beyond this year, and we will be in a different place, hopefully sooner rather than later, and things will be different. And so there's, I've always heard that PTs are some of the most adaptable, like healthcare, because we're constantly have reimbursement. We constantly are struggling with things like that. So I think that Prediction Health is providing, some really positive like things for our future. And I'm really excited about it. So. Oh, yeah.
I'm obviously really biased, but I totally agree. And it's just, I don't know why, but for the longest time, I just thought it's the coolest problem to make these models, make this AI technology that can just read through, the notes, read through the text that gets messy and has abbreviations and typos, and to like actually understand what's going on and unlocking that, right? There's just so many great applications that I think really free people up from a lot of like the drudgery that they don't want to do, so they can focus on the things that they do like to do. And that's also, a lot more fulfilling and enjoyable, and spend time with their patients, right? And not so much like worry about exactly how they phrased the thing, or right. What is the last time they did it, or what would a million different therapists do here, and like what are the different things I can consider. Like if you can read all the unstructured text really fast because you're a computer and you're good at that, right. So many cool things. And yeah, I love it.
Yeah, I agree.
So we have some minutes here. We would love to take any questions that folks have. Obviously, a very broad range of topics open. And so I will open up the floor.
We do have a couple of questions here. Kelly, it looks like this one's for you. For PTs interested in taking on a leadership role within their organization, how would you suggest they initiate that process?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I think obviously first and foremost, you talk to the leadership within your company. I think most companies these days have some way to do that. I think that talking to your current leadership on, what does that step look like? How can you prepare for that? I think that there are also so many resources out there. So if the resources are not built into your company, which some smaller clinics and companies don't have that ability, but if that's not built in, then I would, just go online and look up, physical therapy leadership classes or something. There are so many resources out there. And I would definitely encourage that. Definitely encourage work on social emotional intelligence. That's a great place to start. But ultimately, see what track you have within your own company. And then if there's nothing there, then, go online, because there's so many resources out there.
Thank you. And then we have one more question. This one is related to burnout. The question is, did you find one tool most helpful for working through burnout, or did you find it was sort of a compilation of many things?
I would say, like, if you're going to start anywhere, I think the social emotional intelligence, and also something I forgot to mention that has been completely life altering for me, is the personality test, the Enneagram. So that helped me understand so much about myself and also my staff around me. Again, the only thing we can control is our own responses. And so the more understanding we have of our own personality type, our own self, as well as our social and emotional intelligence, then we can actually start to deal with burnout a lot better. So I would say, if you're going to start anywhere, that's where to start, because you have to first understand yourself in a certain situation in order to become better.
Can I ask a question?
Absolutely.
Of course.
Yeah. Hello, my name is Andrea Schaefer. First of all, thank you guys so much for putting on this presentation. I think discussions like this are so important in the PT world. Having been a clinic director myself, having been a PT myself, having had a staff, I just think having these open conversations around what it is to be not only what I personally think is one of the most paramount healthcare providers that exist out there, because PT can really does a great job of helping people find, okay, if PT isn't the right place for you, where's the next place for you to go? And helping being that conduit to health, wellness, better life, and helping people really identify what it is they're actually in PT for. Like, nobody comes to PT because you want to hang out with your physical therapist. That's a wonderful side benefit, but it's because they have a goal, something they want to achieve, right? Because it's a lot of time out of your day. So my question would be, so as a clinic director and all that good stuff, one of the things that I have always found really challenging is PT is not scalable. 1 hour is 1 hour. So you can't do more when you're always doing 40 hours, right? You can't turn 40 hours into 30 hours and have it still count. You have to bill 40 hours if you're going to be reimbursed for 40 hours. Does that make sense? Totally. So when you have these PTs who are obviously wonderful people doing things like wanting to prioritize other aspects of their lives outside of work, trying to create that work-life balance we talked about, right? In quotes, have you guys even thought about, like, what would be something to consider for the PT world to help clinicians be able to scale their lives so they can not only do a phenomenal job treating patients, but also still have that bandwidth to spend on their personal lives and other, I would say, hobbies?
Yeah, no, I think that's a really great question. And I think that there are multiple answers to that. I think there are basically what is happening currently, which is typically we use techs or aides, right, to expand the available hours that we can work within there. But what we're really trying to do at Prediction Health, and what, Pedro's vision was, and my vision for this company, is that we can take things off of the plate of therapists, take things off of the plate of practice administrators, so that they can actually focus more on those particular things, whether it be patient care or it be their lives, right? And that's where I can't tell you how many times I myself as a clinic director, and then also all the people that I know who are clinic directors or practice administrators, spend Saturday mornings going through numbers, or, Sunday nights, or every night, reviewing things. And so we hope to take that off of the plate because we can automate it. And so that's, again, where the first step is to identify what in the day can be automated. Do we have the technology to do that? I think there's a lot of very forward-thinking PT people out there in the world that are starting to think about those things. And luckily, we know quite a few of those, and we're working with them. But we're always looking for, more ideas, and our clients are always trying to get more ideas about their current workflow. What can we automate? So great question. It's that we're definitely always, because again, there's so many portions of what we do that a human is doing that a human does not have to do. And so we are working on what portion can we automate by analyzing the documentation, which turns out is quite a bit. So it's been fantastic. So thank you, Andrea, for your question.
Yeah, really good question. Very important. And you can basically just think of it as, we have robots that can read every single note, and they read every sentence of every single note, right? And so, like, peer-to-peer review type things you have to do currently to spot check, a couple cases per month or a couple encounters per month, is the kind of thing that we can kind of take off your plate because we're able to scan all the notes, right? And there's so many more things that we're going to be building on top of that because we have something that can, read, it's a robot, read through the notes and find these different things. And maybe there's opportunities for sort of like clinical excellence, practice guideline, almost research, because if it's able to read everyone's notes and look at what they did and then look at the outcomes, maybe we can even figure out ways to be more efficient, right? With what we sort of select by taking what's currently very messy information and having a computational entity, right? Like a ML model, read through it and then organize it to then help provide back insights. And, there's huge variation in what gets done. It's very unlikely that all of that variation is perfect and ideal. And so these kinds of tools to go through, read, understand everything, you can also maybe get higher efficiency, better outcomes, higher quality, if you could really understand across lots of people and lots of practice patterns and very different patients, what's helping for the best. So for that hour, maybe you get more bang for your buck effectively. So another really exciting thing that we're working towards.
Sounds really exciting, because if we could eliminate the after work and Saturday catching up on all the things you couldn't do in the clinic, it would, do you know how much more of your life would open up? So I'm really excited for the technology that you guys are working on. So thank you again.
Thank you so much. Well, Keenan, do we have any other questions, or shall I lead us out here?
I think that's it on questions. Thank you, Pedro and Kelly.
Yes, thank you. This has been wonderful.
Thanks so much, everybody, for joining us. Thanks to the folks that'll get to watch this later. If you have any other questions or something comes up later, info@predictionhealth.com, and you just send off an email, and we're happy to respond or route something over to Kelly or myself. And again, thank you. Have a great rest of your week. And here's looking at some really great stuff in healthcare that we'll have to accomplish together. So, thanks.
Thanks.
Bye.